My name is Caleb Mercer, and 3 months ago, I moved into an apartment building on East 73rd Street, not far from the river. I was 32, recently divorced, and tired of couch surfing in sublets that smelled like someone else's laundry detergent. The building I found was old but well maintained, a narrow red brick structure wedged between two glass towers. Rent was cheap for Manhattan, suspiciously cheap, but the superintendent, Mr. Connors, told me it was because the owners preferred quiet, long-term tenants. The lease packet was thick. I skimmed most of it until I reached a stapled insert labeled in neat block letters. Rhodos Oyos. Midokoians. The page looked like it had been photocopied 100 times, the text faint in places. There were the usual things. No smoking, no loud parties, no pets larger than 30 pounds. But halfway down the rules changed tone 7. Do not use the elevator between 20:30 a.m. and 3:00 a.m. 8. If you hear footsteps in the hallway after midnight, wait until they stop before unlocking your door. 9. Always acknowledge the doorman on duty. If he doesn't respond, go back inside. 10. The basement laundry room closes at dusk. I laughed when I first read them. I figured they were some long-running joke among tenants or leftover superstition from the building's early days. New York had plenty of eccentric rules. Co-op boards that banned certain paint colors, condos that required white curtains for uniformity. But these were different. They sounded behavioral, ritualistic. Still, I signed. The apartment itself was on the 5th floor, facing a courtyard filled with old trees whose roots had broken through the brick paths. My windows didn't close properly, and sometimes I could smell the diner grease from 2nd Avenue wafting in, but it was peaceful compared to my last place in Hell's Kitchen. The walls were thick, and the building seemed to swallow the city noise. On my second day, I met Mrs. Albright, my neighbor across the hall. She looked to be in her 70s but walked briskly, always wearing pressed skirts and pearls. When I mentioned I'd just moved in, she smiled politely and asked, "Did Mr. Connors give you the full list?" I said yes. "Good," she replied, her tone clipped but approving. "Follow them, and you'll do just fine here." Then she shut her door quietly, as though even that sound might matter. That night I lay awake, half listening to the hum of the radiator. Sometime after midnight, faint creaks echoed through the hallway, slow, deliberate, like someone walking with measured steps. They stopped in front of my door, then continued past. I told myself it was Mrs. Albright or maybe the night porter. Still, I waited until the sound faded before I got up for water. The thought that I'd instinctively obeyed Rule 8 made me laugh. The next morning, I took the elevator down to the lobby for work. The doorman, a short man in a navy uniform, nodded as I passed. His name tag read A.L. Vim. I greeted him and he responded with a friendly "Morning, Mercer." The building's lobby was oddly designed. Marble tiles that didn't match, old brass mailboxes, a grandfather clock that ticked just a bit too loudly. Beside the elevator stood a small bulletin board with typed notices. I remember one in particular: Ramandiar basement access closes at dusk. Please plan your laundry accordingly. Someone had underlined dusk 3 times in red pen. That Saturday, I decided to do laundry around 6. The basement smelled of detergent and damp concrete, with a row of humming machines and a single flickering light near the far corner. It was quiet, except for one other tenant, a young woman folding towels. She looked up when I entered and nodded curtly. "You're new," she said. "Yeah, just moved in last week." "Then you should head upstairs soon. It's almost dusk." I smiled awkwardly. "You mean because of the rule?" She didn't smile back. "Because of the rule," she said, emphasizing it like I'd missed something obvious. Then she took her laundry basket and left without another word. I finished loading my clothes, but I couldn't shake the unease. Through the high windows, the light outside had turned gold, that in-between hour when the city starts glowing, but the sun hasn't quite gone. I told myself it was fine to finish the cycle. It'd take 28 minutes. But halfway through, the air in the basement changed. The hum of the machine seemed louder. The fluorescent bulb flickered more erratically. Then, faintly, I heard a door open somewhere behind the wall of machines. A slow, dragging creak. The sound stopped, then started again like someone pacing along the concrete floor. I froze, listening. The pipes rattled overhead. I told myself it was just the boiler room next door, but my hands were shaking as I pulled wet clothes from the washer and stuffed them into the basket. When I reached the elevator, Alvin wasn't at his post. The lobby lights were dimmed, and the street beyond the glass doors looked darker than it should have at that hour. I hurried upstairs, telling myself this city made everyone superstitious. By week 2, the strangeness became part of routine. The building was spotless, almost unnaturally so, and I never saw maintenance workers. Yet the trash chute never jammed, the elevators gleamed, and the hall carpets were always freshly vacuumed. I started recognizing more tenants. The couple from 5B who whispered when they walked past, a delivery guy who refused to ride the elevator after dark, and an old man on the 3rd floor who always kept his door cracked open just enough to peer through. Every interaction felt like it came with a warning nobody said out loud. One evening, I got back late after drinks with a coworker. My phone read 2:24 a.m. I stepped into the elevator without thinking. The old brass doors slid shut, and the floor numbers ticked upward. Then, halfway between the 3rd and 4th floors, the elevator jolted violently and stopped. The lights dimmed to amber. For a moment, I thought it was just an outage. I pressed the emergency button, but nothing happened. My chest tightened. Then I noticed the clock above the panel, the hands frozen exactly at 20:30 am. I stared at them, my breath catching. Do not use the elevator between 20:30 and 300 a.m. My first thought was ridiculous, that maybe someone programmed the elevator to stop automatically. But as seconds passed, the temperature dropped sharply. My reflection in the brass walls seemed a shade darker than it should have been. Then I heard it, a soft exhale, not mine, echoing from above. I looked up, expecting to see a vent, but the sound came again, rhythmic, deliberate, like someone breathing slowly just over the ceiling panel. I slammed the door open, button repeatedly. Nothing. Then the elevator lurched and began moving, smooth as before. It opened on the 5th floor. I stepped out so fast I nearly tripped. The hallway was silent, dimly lit by wall sconces. I stood there listening to my pulse thudding in my ears. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. The next morning, I asked Alvin about it. He didn't look surprised. "You were lucky it started again," he said, eyes darting toward the ceiling. "Sometimes it doesn't." I asked what he meant, but he only shrugged. "Maintenance takes care of it." By now, I'd stopped dismissing the rules as quirks. There was a pattern to them. I could feel it. Something about timing, sound, acknowledgement. They weren't just for order, they were for safety, though from what, no one said. A few nights later, around midnight, I heard the hallway creak again. Slow, deliberate footsteps stopping outside my door. The same as before, but this time, they lingered longer. A shuffle, then stillness. I held my breath. Then came a knock, soft but deliberate, 3 times. I froze. No one visited that late. I checked the peephole, but the hall was empty. The next morning, I found a folded slip of paper slid under my door. It was typed faint like the other notices. "Ramandr, please do not respond to knocks after midnight." I read it 3 times before sitting down on the couch, paper trembling in my hand. No one had ever mentioned such a rule before. It wasn't in the packet. I went to see Mr. Connors. His office was tucked behind the lobby, a small glass cubicle with dusty blinds. When I asked him about the new rule, he sighed. "Those are updates for residents in good standing," he said carefully. "They're not all written down. But it's best to comply." "Comply with what?" I asked. He looked at me for a long time, expression unreadable. "With what's kept this place running for 80 years, he said. "You'll sleep better if you don't ask more than that." When I left, Alvin was at the door again, watching me quietly. The grandfather clock ticked louder than usual, marking every second. I went back upstairs and locked my door twice. That night, I didn't hear footsteps. But just before sleep, I thought I heard the faint creak of the elevator starting up, its motor humming even though the clock on my nightstand read 2:37 a.m. And for the first time since moving in, I understood something simple but absolute. Whatever those rules were, they weren't arbitrary. They were there because something, someone, had already broken them once. The next morning I woke before dawn, heart pounding from a dream I couldn't fully remember. I sat up in bed listening. The building was quiet, too quiet for New York. Usually, there'd be the low groan of pipes, or a neighbor's TV muffled through the wall, or a taxi horn bleating faintly from the street. But now, nothing. I opened my window. The air smelled like rain even though the sky was clear. Down in the courtyard, the trees swayed faintly in a wind I couldn't feel. When I glanced at my phone, I noticed a text from an unknown number. Time-stamped at 2:41 a.m. FRM, no caller ID, do not leave again during the restricted hour. I stared at it until my alarm went off, then, without replying, I deleted it. At work, I kept replaying the night before. The elevator, the breathing, the paper under my door. My rational brain kept insisting there had to be a normal explanation: maintenance schedules, drafts, aging pipes, coincidences. But the other half of me, the one that listened for footsteps before unlocking my door, wasn't so sure anymore. That evening I saw Mrs. Albright again. She was checking her mail, hands trembling slightly as she sorted envelopes. I hesitated, then asked if she'd ever had strange experiences here. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes flicked up to mine, sharp as glass. You've been hearing things. More like noticing things. She folded a letter in half with deliberate care. Then you should stop noticing. That's not really, Mercer. She cut me off softly, her voice barely above a whisper. This building rewards obedience. Curiosity, not so much. You seem sensible. Stay that way. She walked past me toward the elevator, pressing the button. I almost asked if she knew what would happen if someone ignored the rules. But before I could, the doors opened and she stepped inside. The clock in the lobby read 5:52 p.m., well before the forbidden hours. But still I noticed her eyes dart to the time before she let the doors close. That night, I couldn't sleep again. I kept my phone beside me, its glow the only light in the room. At 12:17 a.m., soft footsteps returned, measures slow, deliberate. I lay still, counting them as they approached. 7 steps. Pause. 2 more. Then silence directly outside my door. A faint knock followed. 3 times again. I waited. When nothing else came, I crept to the door and looked through the peaceful, empty hall. I stayed there for a full minute before something shifted. A shadow, maybe. Farther down the corridor near the stairwell. I blinked, and it was gone. In the morning, there was another slip of paper under my door. Notice C. Please ensure your peephole is covered after midnight. The letters were smudged, as if typed with an old ribbon. The building wasn't mailing these. Someone was hand-delivering them. By week 4, I began cataloging every pattern I noticed. Rules seemed to arrive in clusters. 1 for noise, 1 for light, 1 for timing. It felt like the building itself was training me to behave a certain way, like an experiment with invisible parameters. I started watching the doorman more closely, too. Alvin was always there, day or night, and I realized I'd never seen him leave his post. His uniform was always pressed, his expression calm, but sometimes he'd glance toward the elevator with a flicker of unease, as if anticipating something. One morning when the lobby was empty, I asked, "Do you live here too?" He hesitated, then smiled faintly. In a manner of speaking. "Have you worked here long?" His eyes narrowed, amused but cautious. Long enough to remember what happens when people stop listening. He turned away before I could respond, pretending to straighten the mailboxes. I left, feeling watched even after the door shut behind me. Later that week, a new notice appeared on the lobby board. Attente antis, due to maintenance. Hallway lights may dim intermittently during nighttime hours. Please remain in your units during any outages. It sounded routine, but I didn't like the phrasing. Remain in your units. Not for safety, not until power returns. Just an order. That night around 11:45 p.m. I was reading on the couch when the lights flickered once, twice, then went out entirely. The hum of the refrigerator stopped. My phone buzzed. A push alert from the city. No OGS repar UREA. I grabbed a flashlight and stood by the door. The hallway beyond my peephole was pitch black. Then, faintly, a rustling sound, like someone dragging fabric across the carpet. I turned off the flashlight instinctively. For a long moment, I heard nothing. Then a voice, soft, female, Caleb. It came from the other side of the door, low but distinct, my name. Caleb opened the door. My mouth went dry. It wasn't anyone I knew. The tone was wrong, calm, almost polite. I stepped back, heart pounding. Then came another voice, this one male, deeper, rougher. The two sounds overlapped, indistinct through the wood. I stood frozen, caught between them. Then the power returned. The lights flicked back on, silence. When I checked the hall, it was empty. The next morning, I found 2 slips of paper under my door. Ramendar, do not engage in conversation through the door after dark. Adenam voices may imitate the living. I sat on the floor holding them, my throat tight. The formatting was identical to before, the type faint and misaligned. But this time, someone had handwritten one extra line beneath the second notice. Do not answer the one that says your name. I showed the notes to Mr. Connors later that day. He sighed when he saw them, rubbing his temples. You've been noticed, he said quietly. By who? He didn't answer. Instead, he opened a drawer and took out a small envelope with my apartment number written on it. Inside was another printed sheet, NEWAD to Ionerelli Ios 11. Keep all curtains drawn between 200 a.m. and sunrise. 12. Do not look into the courtyard after midnight. I started laughing out of sheer disbelief. You're kidding me. Is this some kind of performance art, an initiation? Connors didn't join in. You wanted a quiet building, Mr. Mercer. That quiet has rules. I left before I said something I'd regret. That night, I taped my curtains shut just to prove a point. To myself, not the building. But around 20:10 a.m., I woke to a faint scraping noise near the window. I turned on my bedside lamp and froze. The bottom edge of the curtain had lifted an inch, fluttering even though there was no breeze. I could see the faint outline of the courtyard trees beyond. Then, quick, deliberate, something brushed the fabric from the outside. It wasn't a branch. It was higher, smoother, like fingertips. I yanked the curtain down and backed away. When I checked in the morning, there were faint streaks on the glass, almost like handprints, but too long, the proportions off somehow. I took a picture, but by noon the marks were gone. I ran into the young woman from the laundry room again that afternoon. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes. You're on the 5th floor, right? She asked.
Yeah,
Then stop taping your curtains.
it doesn't like that.
What doesn't? She blinked slowly as if realizing she'd said too much. You should request a transfer. Lower floors are quieter. I asked her name, but she just shook her head and walked away. The next week passed in fragments. I slept badly. I started hearing the elevator at odd hours again, always between 2:30 and 300, though my clock would show different times every night. Once, it stopped on my floor for a full minute, doors closed, humming like something alive behind metal. I stopped using it altogether, taking the stairs even when I was exhausted. The stairwell was narrow and smelled like cleaning chemicals, but at least it felt honest. One night, climbing back from the lobby, I noticed a small metal door behind the 4th floor landing, painted the same color as the wall, half hidden behind an exit sign. No label, no lock. I tried the handle, but it didn't move. When I asked Mr. Connors about it later, his jaw tightened. That's maintenance access. To what? He paused. Old service conduits, the kind we don't use anymore. But I caught something in his tone, hesitation, maybe even fear. That evening, a new slip waited on my floor. Regula UPDU 13. Do not attempt to open unmarked doors. I didn't tell anyone I'd tried. That was when I stopped questioning whether the rules were real. The building wasn't reacting randomly, it was aware, responsive. Every time I tested its limits, it closed ranks tighter. But it wasn't until the following Thursday that I realized something worse. Someone else on my floor was breaking them. Around 2:45 a.m., I woke to shouting, muffled but frantic. A man's voice yelling, "Help, please!" From the hallway, I stumbled to the door, hand on the knob, before the ruled in my mind. Wait until footsteps stop before unlocking. Then the footsteps came fast, chaotic. I heard the man pound on doors, one after another.
Open up, please.
When he reached mine, I pressed my back to the wood, frozen. His voice cracked, desperate. They're coming. Then silence. A sound followed, wet, dragging, heavy. Then nothing. When I finally opened the door at dawn, the hallway carpet was spotless, freshly vacuumed as always. No sign anyone had been there. But the next morning, apartment 5C, 2 doors down, had a new tenant, and no one mentioned the previous one again. 2 days passed before anyone acknowledged the vacancy in 5C. On Saturday morning, a moving truck blocked the front entrance while a man in a gray suit supervised. He didn't look like a mover. No gloves, no sweat. Just stood there checking his watch as others carried boxes up the steps. When I asked Alvin who the new tenant was, he just said, "Someone reliable." By noon, the truck was gone. But that night, around 10, I heard footsteps next door, slow pacing, then a faint rhythmic thump like someone tapping on the wall. The sound came in threes. I knocked back once, half joking. The tapping stopped. The next morning, a note had been slipped under my door again. Remandar, do not respond to signals from adjoining units. My hands went cold. That meant whoever was leaving these notes, whoever watched, knew exactly what happened inside each apartment. I started noticing other small changes. The elevator had new brass buttons, polished and bright, as if freshly installed. The grandfather clock in the lobby, which had ticked loud as a heartbeat since I moved in, now showed no movement at all, hands frozen at 300. When I mentioned it to Alvin, he frowned. "Clock's always been like that." "No, it hasn't. It used to chime every hour." He looked at me, expression unreadable. "You must be remembering another building." That was when it hit me, the slow erosion of certainty. The rules didn't just govern behavior, they bent memory. Things changed, and no one else seemed to notice. Or they noticed and chose not to. That evening, I passed the new tenant in the hallway. He was around my age, maybe younger, with neatly combed hair and a faint scar along his jawline. He smiled politely when our eyes met. "Caleb, right?" he said.
Yeah, you're in 5C. That's me.
"Name's Richard." He extended his hand. It was cool to the touch, his grip too firm. "You been here long? Few weeks?" I hesitated, then added, "It takes some getting used to." He nodded, smile tightening. "So I've heard. They gave me the list. The rules." He chuckled low.
Yeah.
I thought they were joking. I didn't know what to say, so I just gave a small nod. "Don't test them." Something flickered in his eyes, curiosity maybe. "You really believe all that?" I hesitated. "I believe they exist for a reason." He smirked. "Wes, I'll find out." That night, I lay awake listening. Around midnight, faint footsteps came from his direction. Then a door opened, the soft creak unmistakable. My pulse quickened. The rules were clear. Do not use the elevator between 230 and 300. At 2037, I heard the elevator bell chime. A single ding, then silence. I wanted to look through the peephole, but the warning about covering it after midnight echoed in my mind. Instead, I stood there in the dark, waiting. The next morning, Richard didn't answer when I knocked. By evening, the smell hit me, faint metallic, like rust or old pennies. I told myself it was the pipes, or maybe something in the walls. But later, 2 men in gray uniforms entered his unit with a ring of master keys. They left an hour later carrying a large plastic, wrapped shape that could have been anything. By dawn, 5C's door had a new brass nameplate Canty, Pendage OCPNCY. I stopped asking questions after that. A week later, I came home to find another envelope on my table, placed neatly beside my keys. I hadn't left the door unlocked, but the lock showed no sign of tampering. Inside were more typed pages, new rules. Infevited regulatio farfetch follow tense 14. Do not acknowledge replacements 15. If the elevator stops on your floor between 2:30 and 300 a.m., remain still and silent until it departs. 16. Do not accept deliveries you did not order. The first line, do not acknowledge replacements, made my skin crawl. I thought of Richard, of the moving truck that had come so quickly after the shouting weeks before. Replacements. That night, I dreamed of a corridor that stretched endlessly, lined with identical doors. Each one bore my name. When I tried to open any of them, the handles burned cold against my palms. When I woke, I decided to start documenting everything. Not just the rules, but timestamps, sounds, temperature shifts, even my own reactions. If this was psychological, I wanted proof. By the end of the week, I had 6 pages of notes, footstep intervals, patterns in the elevator noise, power flickers logged to the minute. There was a rhythm to it all, a structure, as if the building itself followed a schedule no one else could see. Then, one night around 2:45 a.m., I heard the elevator again. This time, it didn't stop on my floor, it descended, pausing briefly every level. The hum was low, vibrating through the walls. Out of curiosity, or maybe defiance, I grabbed my notebook and crept into the hallway. Light pooled under the elevator doors, faint and flickering like candlelight. Then I heard voices inside. 2, maybe 3. I couldn't make out words, only the cadence, steady, murmured, almost ritualistic. The indicator light bleaked B1. Basement. Against every instinct, I took the stairs down. The lower I went, the colder the air became. The door to the basement stood ajar. From inside came a rhythmic sound, like water dripping, but slower, thicker. I pushed the door gently. The basement looked different from before. The machines were gone. The concrete floor gleamed as if freshly scrubbed. At the far end stood the same flickering light I'd seen from upstairs. And 3 people in uniforms. 2 men and 1 woman, all standing in front of the far wall, their backs to me. They didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there facing the brick. Then one of them turned his head slightly. Not enough to see me, just enough to show he'd already known I was there. "Lester Mercer," he said evenly. It was Alvin's voice. I stepped back. "I was just upstairs," he interrupted. "You should be upstairs." His tone wasn't angry, just absolute. The others didn't move. "I heard the elevator. I managed." He nodded slowly. "And you followed it. Don't do that again." "Why?" He turned fully now, expression calm but eyes colder than I'd ever seen him. "Because curiosity is contagious, and we're almost out of replacements." Something in me broke then. I ran, up the stairs, through the lobby, back to my apartment, double-locked the door, and slid down against it shaking. An hour later, a new note was under the door. "Ramandar, do not enter restricted areas. Penalty for violation, adjustment." That word, adjustment, lingered in my mind. The next day, the basement door was padlocked, bright new metal glinting in the hallway light. A fresh sign hung above it, "Aurais ad personally." No one else seemed to find it strange. Mrs. Albright passed me in the hall carrying groceries, her posture perfectly straight. "You look pale," she said lightly. "Rove night." I wanted to ask her everything, about the replacement people, about the rules, about what adjustment meant, but her expression shut the questions down before they left my mouth. "You'll adapt," she said softly. "We all do." After she left, I realized what felt wrong. The groceries she carried, milk, fruit, bread, were in paper bags from a store that had closed months ago. That night I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, staring at the courtyard. The trees barely moved, even though wind hissed faintly between the buildings. Somewhere below, a light flickered on, a window I'd never noticed before, low and square against the courtyard wall. It glowed for 5 minutes, then went dark. I wrote the time down, 3:04 a.m. The next night it happened again, and again the night after that. Each time, exactly 3:04. The 4th night I couldn't help myself. I went downstairs quietly, barefoot, carrying my flashlight. The courtyard door creaked when I opened it, and the air outside was heavy with the smell of damp brick and old leaves. I crossed the cracked pavement to the far wall. The window was low, ground level, half obscured by ivy. I crouched and peered through. Inside was a narrow room, bare concrete, dim light overhead, and in the middle, a single wooden chair facing the wall. Someone was sitting in it. At first, I thought it was my reflection, same dark hair, same build. But when the figure tilted its head, I saw the jawline, the faint scar. It was Richard. His eyes were open, unfocused, lips moving as though whispering. I stumbled backward, heart hammering. My flashlight slipped and clattered against the stones. When I looked again, the chair was empty. The next morning, another notice waited on my table. Phenol RMG observation without authorization is prohibited. Continued noncompliance will result in reassignment. I didn't go to work that day. I packed a bag, ready to leave. But when I reached the front door of the building, Alvin stood there, blocking the exit. "Going somewhere, Mr. Mercer." "I'm done," I said. "I'm not staying here another night." He smiled faintly, almost pitying. Tenants can't break lease before completion. I'll pay whatever penalty you want. It's not about money. I stepped closer, anger rising. Then what the hell is it about? His voice softened, nearly kind. It's about order. You're part of it now. I turned toward the street doors, but the locks wouldn't turn. They weren't even mechanical anymore. No keyholes, just smooth metal. When I looked back, Alvin was gone. The lobby was empty. Only the grandfather clock remained, its hands ticking again. Slow and steady, both pointing to 2:30. After that morning in the locked lobby, I tried to convince myself it had been fatigue, a panic episode, something with a medical name I could own. I stayed inside for most of the day, curtains drawn, replaying the moment the door handles felt smooth beneath my hands. No keyholes. That was verifiable. I ran my fingers over the brass that night. The indentations where the locks had been were filled and polished, perfectly flush. Someone had changed them in less than 24 hours. Later, I checked my lease again. Section 8 had new text I didn't remember signing. Tenants are required to notify management prior to any extended absence from premises. Unauthorized departure may result in termination of occupancy rights. The wording wasn't familiar, but the initials at the bottom were mine. That realization did something subtle, tilted my sense of time. I started doubting when things had happened. Had I signed a new copy? Was it possible I'd just forgotten? At 9 p.m., I walked down to the lobby. Alvin was there, reading a folded newspaper. He didn't look up when I approached. "I need to speak with Mr. Connors," I said. "Connors has retired," he replied without looking up. "When?" He turned the page carefully. "Yesterday." I stared at him. "He was here this morning." Finally, he raised his eyes. "Then you must have spoken with someone else." I didn't push. My throat felt dry. I went back upstairs and called the management number printed on the lease. The line rang once, then played a recorded message. "Thank you for calling Mercer Properties." I froze. Mercer, my own surname. The message continued with an automated tone. "All current tenants are in good standing. No further action required." Then silence. I hung up, sat on the floor, and stared at the phone for a long time. Days started blending after that. The building was quiet as ever, but I noticed people moving differently. Less like neighbors, more like staff on a shift. They spoke softly to one another, glancing at the cameras mounted in the corners. I hadn't realized there were cameras before. Now they were everywhere. On Tuesday, a maintenance crew arrived, 3 men in plain uniforms. They didn't knock before entering apartments. I watched them through the peephole as they moved down the hall, checking door frames, photographing hinges. One carried a small black tablet. Every few steps, he'd scan something invisible on the wall, the way people use a barcode reader. When they reached my door, I stepped back, not breathing. The reader emitted a soft beep, and one of them said, "5A compliant." Then they moved on. That evening, a typed notice slid under my door. I'm communicate 5A, status compliant, next ever WTB. No signature. I started writing again, but not just notes. Descriptions of every face, every sound. It gave me a small sense of control. The pattern forming on the page was unmistakable. The rules weren't random. They were methods of containment. Every restriction on noise, light, and movement minimized unpredictability. A self-regulating system. It wasn't supernatural. It was behavioral engineering. Maybe the building was part of some psychological study, long-term observation, environmental conditioning. That would explain the disappearances, the strict routines, the way new tenants appeared seamlessly. But who would authorize something like that in the middle of Manhattan? I decided to test it. At 11:59 p.m. on Thursday, I propped my phone against the doorframe, camera facing the hall. I wanted evidence, footsteps, knocks, anything. Then I sat on the couch, volume up, waiting. At 12:12 a.m. there was movement. The screen showed the shadow of a person stopping outside my door. No sound, no knock. They just stood there for 30 seconds, then slipped a paper through the gap and walked away. When I played the video again, I noticed something off. The timestamp didn't match my phone's clock. It showed 11:42 p.m. I checked the phone settings. The internal clock was correct. The video metadata wasn't. The paper on the floor read Rem NDR, unauthorized recording devices are prohibited. That should have scared me more than it did. Instead, I felt a kind of numb admiration. Whoever ran this building knew exactly how to enforce compliance. Subtle pressure, quiet correction, no open conflict. The next morning, Mrs. Albright knocked softly. Her hands trembled as she held a tin of cookies. "I thought you might need something sweet," she said, but her eyes darted to the corners of my ceiling, where no camera was visible, but she seemed to sense one. "You should stop writing things down," she whispered. "They notice patterns." "Who are they?" Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Management. Always management." When she left, I tore my notes into strips and flushed them down the toilet. But that didn't make me feel safer. It felt like erasing proof of my own existence. The following night, I dreamt of my apartment stripped bare. No furniture, no lights, just clean white walls and a single chair in the center. When I woke, the dream left a taste of disinfectant in my mouth. I started spending more time outside. Central Park, late afternoons near the reservoir. Crowds comforted me, yet each time I returned, the air inside the building pressed down heavier. Even the temperature in my unit stayed constant, 68 degrees Fahrenheit every day, no matter what I set the thermostat to. One evening when I came back, the doorman wasn't Alvin. A woman sat behind the desk instead, same uniform, same calm posture. Her name tag read Alvia. "Where's Alvin?" I asked. She looked puzzled. "You must be mistaken. There's only me." I glanced toward the elevator, but before I could step in, she said softly, "You shouldn't ride that at night." My heart kicked once hard. "You know about the rule?" She smiled faintly. "We all follow the rules here, Mr. Mercer." I wanted to ask what happened to those who didn't, but her tone made it sound like small talk, like she was commenting on the weather. That night I printed an email to myself explaining everything, the rules, the notes, the disappearances, and set it to send automatically to a friend in 48 hours unless I canceled it. I wrote in clear, clinical language, avoiding words that might sound delusional. At 3 a.m., I woke to the faint hum of machinery. The sound came from the wall behind my bed. I pressed my ear to it and heard something whirring, intermittent clicks, like a hidden vent adjusting airflow. When I moved my bed aside the next morning, I found a square panel in the drywall. No handle, just a circular indentation. I pried it open with a screwdriver. Inside was a small device the size of a smoke detector, wires leading into the studs. A green LED blinked once every 5 seconds. I recorded a short clip on my phone and sent it to the building's maintenance email, demanding an explanation. 2 hours later, I received a response. "Thank you for your inquiry. That device monitors air quality for your safety. Please do not tamper further." When I checked again that night, the device was gone, the wall resealed and freshly painted. I tried leaving the building again the next morning, early before sunrise. The front doors opened normally this time. The city outside looked washed clean by overnight rain. I walked 3 blocks, half expecting someone to follow. No one did. I bought a coffee, sat on a bench, waited for the sun to rise. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. When I came back around 8, Alvina nodded at me pleasantly. "Good morning, Mr. Mercer. Productive night." I stopped mid-step. "How did you know I left?" She tilted her head. "You checked out, didn't you?" "Checked out. Every exit logs movement, building security records, standard practice." I wanted to argue, but her tone made it sound entirely ordinary, as if every apartment in New York required residents to clock in and out like employees. Upstairs, my apartment smelled faintly of bleach. The trash bin was empty. The coffee mug I'd left in the sink was gone. I opened the cabinet. Everything arranged differently, labeled in neat handwriting that wasn't mine glassware. Dry goods, spices. A new notice was taped to the fridge. "Oh, sis, gras. Please maintain routine." I sat at the kitchen table shaking. It wasn't fear anymore. It was the slow realization that I couldn't prove what routine meant to anyone but them. At noon, there was a knock. A man in a plain gray suit stood in the doorway. "Mr. Mercer, management follow-up." He smiled politely and showed an ID badge with a logo I didn't recognize, an outline of a building inside a circle. "I won't take much of your time," he said. "Just confirming your continued residency. That depends on what that means." He chuckled softly, the sound practiced. "Only that you're satisfied here." I didn't answer. He looked around the room, eyes lingering on the freshly painted wall. "Good. Maintenance stays ahead of things. Predictability is key." When he left, I followed him into the hall. He turned toward the elevator, pressed the button, and stepped inside. The doors closed without sound. The floor indicator stayed blank. I waited a full minute, but the elevator never moved. By evening, my phone pinged. A new text from an unknown number. "We appreciate your cooperation. Your next evaluation is scheduled for 20:30 a.m. I stared at it until the screen dimmed. Then, without thinking, I powered the phone off and buried it in the drawer. That night, I didn't sleep. The clock on my nightstand clicked over from 29:29 to 20:30, and somewhere below the elevator began to hum. No voices, no footsteps, just the mechanical rhythm of a system running exactly as designed. I lay there in the dark, wide awake, realizing the truth that had been circling me for weeks. The rules weren't protecting us from something outside. They were protecting something inside, from us. The next morning, sunlight hit the blinds like nothing had happened. The city outside sounded normal. Delivery trucks, pigeons, a kid yelling somewhere on the street. But the air in my apartment felt wrong. It had a weight to it, like the air before a thunderstorm. I checked my phone. The text about my valuation was gone, not in my messages, not in deleted items. The timestamp on my alarm history skipped from 2029 to 3:04. I needed something verifiable, something concrete. I decided to leave again, but this time I'd make it impossible for them to erase proof. I took my passport, my lease, and a few photos of the apartment. Then I packed a duffel bag and walked down to the lobby around 9. Alvina wasn't there. In her place sat a new man, maybe mid-40s, same navy uniform, same brass tag, then again. I blinked. He looked exactly like the first one. Same calm eyes, same short hair, same faint scar on the chin. "Morning, Mr. Mercer," he said, like everything was fine. I stopped myself. "You've been gone." He smiled politely. "I don't take days off." I didn't answer. I just nodded and walked out. The sky was bright, blue in a way that almost looked artificial after so long inside. I took the subway uptown, switched lines twice, and went to a coffee shop near Columbus Circle. Somewhere crowded. I spent an hour reading old news archives on my laptop, searching the building's address. There was barely anything. One property sale listing from 1989, another from 2004, and a brief article about minor code violations resolved swiftly. Nothing about owners, tenants, or management. Just a shell company, Mercer Holdings LLC, registered to a P.O. box in Queens. My name in the listing wasn't a coincidence. I knew that now. I opened the email I'd set to auto-send. The timer showed it had been canceled at 2:33 a.m. The system log said it was done manually from my device. Except I'd been asleep. I went cold. Someone had been inside again. When I got back to the building that evening, everything was quiet. Too quiet. No doorman, no hum from the elevator, not even the faint ticking of the lobby clock. I took the stairs, avoiding eye contact with the cameras I could feel but not see. Inside my apartment, something was different. The lights were brighter just slightly. My duffel bag, the one I'd packed that morning, was unpacked and neatly folded on the bed. Passport gone. The fridge was full again too, but not with anything I'd bought. Rows of identical containers labeled prepared meal, tenant 5A, each stamped with a date tomorrow's. My pulse raced. I opened one. Inside was plain oatmeal. No smell, no temperature, just texture. That was when I heard the soft chime from my laptop. A new email had arrived. Management's Mercer Holdings, Nasibajate. Evaluation completed. Thank you for your continued compliance, Mr. Mercer. Routine is stability. Stability is safety. There was an attachment, PDF. I opened it. It was a report 12 pages long, with tables of data, my daily movements, approximate hours of speech, sleep cycles, even bathroom visits logged to the minute. The final line read, "Subject displays minor resistance but remains within acceptable parameters. Recommend continued observation. No adjustment required at this time." That phrase, "no adjustment required," landed heavier than any threat could. I closed the laptop and paced. Every rule, every pattern, it wasn't superstition. It was conditioning. The replacements weren't people being taken. They were people who stopped following instructions, who became unpredictable. Maybe relocated, maybe worse. I tried to think of anyone I could tell, but even if I walked into a police station, what would I say? My apartment building writes performance reviews about my sleep schedule. Still, I had to try. I left again past midnight, wearing the same clothes, keeping my head down. The front doors opened easily this time, but the moment I stepped onto the sidewalk, a man in a gray jacket turned the corner and nearly collided with me. He looked startled, then recovered instantly. "Mr. Mercer," he said, smiling. "You're ahead of schedule." "I'm not scheduled for anything." He gestured back toward the building. "Best not to disrupt pattern continuity." "Who are you?" "Facilities liaison." He said it like it should have meant something. "Let's keep to the plan, yes." He held the door open. Waiting, I walked past him without answering, straight down the block. I didn't stop until I reached Lexington Avenue. The city noise hit me like oxygen. People, cars, motion, proof of normal life. I turned the corner and pulled out my phone, intending to call someone, anyone. No signal. I crossed the street. Still no signal. When I looked back, the building was visible only from certain angles. From others, it seemed to vanish behind its glass neighbors, as if swallowed by reflection. I kept walking. For half an hour, I moved through the Upper East Side, trying to map the streets, but every time I turned back towards 73rd, I ended up at the same intersection near the river. At 20:28 a.m., my phone vibrated. "Return to your unit." The message came from my own number. The sidewalks were empty now. The windows of the building across the street reflected faint orange light, street lamps flickering in unison. The longer I stood there, the more I realized how quiet it was. Even in Manhattan, there's always noise. But not here. Not anymore. I walked back because I didn't know what else to do. Alvin, or someone identical, was waiting in the lobby again. He smiled. "Good evening, Mr. Mercer. Long night? Why can't I leave?" "You're mistaken," he said gently. "You leave all the time." He gestured toward the cameras above us. "We have it recorded." The footage, I realized, could show anything they wanted. I wasn't sure anymore what was real. When I reached my apartment, the lights were off, though I was certain I'd left them on. A faint hum came from the vent. On the kitchen table lay a new notice, folded once. AVN has to W. Subagesia stegotinstins maintain routine as established. Report any unauthorized sensations, sounds, or thoughts to management. Deviation beyond 15% will result in reassessment. Below, a signature in thick blue ink, Dr. R. Connors. I stared at it for a long time. Retired. That was the word Alvin had used. Not gone, retired. And now here he was again, back in print. At 3:00 a.m., the ceiling vent clicked once and stopped. The air pressure shifted. My laptop screen lit up on its own, and the PDF reopened. A new line had appeared at the bottom. Subject remains compliant despite external exposure. I turned it off, unplugged it, and shoved it in a drawer. Then I sat in the dark, trying to stay still. Around 4:00 a.m., I must have dozed off, because I woke to sunlight and the smell of coffee. The pot was full, steaming on the counter. Someone had brewed it. I checked the door, locked from the inside. For the first time, I called out, "Who's there?" Nothing. Just the steady sound of dripping coffee. I stood there staring at the pot, feeling something twist inside me. Maybe it wasn't about keeping us in. Maybe it was about seeing how far we'd go before we stopped resisting. I poured the coffee, sat at the table, and started writing everything again, every detail. Every rule, every sign. I wasn't going to let them overwrite me. That afternoon the phone rang. Landline, not my cell. I didn't even remember having one. "Mr. Mercer," a calm voice said, "this is your final evaluation notice." "Who is this?" "Maintenance. We'd like you to come downstairs at 20:30 for a brief check-in." "I'm not going anywhere near that elevator." A pause. Then, "We appreciate initiative, but adherence is vital. Someone will escort you if necessary." The line clicked off. By evening I'd packed again, light this time, no valuables, just the essentials. I planned to slip out before midnight, walk straight to the precinct on 67th, and stay there until sunrise if I had to. But when I opened the door, Mrs. Albright was standing in the hall. She looked different, tired, makeup smeared, eyes red. "You can't run," she whispered. "They'll only start over." "What does that mean?" She shook her head. "Every building needs a caretaker. Someone has to enforce compliance." Then she did something that chilled me more than anything yet. She smiled kindly, almost maternal, and said, "You've lasted longer than most." Before I could respond, she turned and walked toward the elevator. I watched the doors close around her. The clock on the wall read 2:29. The elevator descended smoothly, and from behind its metal doors came the faint, deliberate ding of arrival, right on time. When the elevator doors closed around Mrs. Albright, I waited for the sound of them reopening on another floor. It never came. The building went still, humming faintly like a body holding its breath. I stayed in the hallway for several minutes before returning to my apartment. The air smelled faintly of ozone and lemon cleaner. On the kitchen counter sat a new slip of paper. Short, typed in the same fading ink as always. "Nada, you are scheduled for transition review. Remain inside your unit until collection. No time given. No explanation." I folded the paper, slid it into my pocket, and locked the door. Then I did what I'd been too afraid to do until now. I searched the apartment. Every corner, every wall panel, every hidden space. I found 3 small microphones, one under the table, one behind the bathroom vent, and one embedded in the smoke detector. I unscrewed them all and dropped them into a glass of water. Nothing happened. No alarms, no pounding on the door. Just quiet. At 11:45 p.m. the lights dimmed briefly, then steadied. I thought about what Mrs. Albright had said, that someone had to enforce compliance. Maybe she'd been the caretaker all along, keeping us in line until it was her turn to retire. And now, the system was looking for someone new. I started to suspect that's what transition meant. At midnight, I wrote another email, this one not to anyone I knew. I addressed it to half a dozen random addresses pulled from online directories. Subject line, "If you hear from me." I attached photos, the notes, the rule sheets, the hallway cameras. I hit send. The emails vanished instantly from my outbox. No bounce, no delay. Just gone. I stared at the blank screen, realizing there was no outside left for this place to connect to. Around 2 a.m., the building shifted again. The hum from the elevator starting somewhere below, climbing floor by floor. It stopped at 5. The light under my door flickered. I stayed perfectly still. Then came a soft voice, muffled through the wood. "Mr. Mercer, we're ready for you now." I didn't move. "Please open the door." No authority, no threat. Just patient, measured tone. I picked up my phone and started recording audio. "Who are you?" "Management review." "You've reached your evaluation threshold." I kept the camera rolling as I backed toward the window. The door handle turned once, slowly, testing. Then again, harder. Metal clicked softly, like a key sliding into a new lock. I whispered, "You don't have authorization to enter." The voice paused. "That's true," it said, almost kindly. "But you removed your own devices. That qualifies as self-initiation. You've accepted review by default." The lock gave way. I ran to the window. But it didn't open. None of them did. The glass had been sealed at the edges, a faint chemical line glistening along the frame. The door swung inward. 3 people stood there. 2 in gray uniforms, one in a dark suit, clipboard, pen, calm expressions. "Mr. Mercer," the suited one said. "We'll appreciate your cooperation." I didn't agree to anything. "You've been participating since you arrived." He glanced at the walls, noting the damp microphones. "You've provided valuable data. Thank you for that." I forced my voice steady. "This is illegal. Whatever this is." He smiled politely. "Every consent form you've signed since moving in remains valid." He motioned toward the hallway. "It's time for your transition review." I didn't move. Then, one of the uniformed men spoke softly. "It's easier if you walk." Something in his tone wasn't a threat. It was wary. Like someone repeating a script they'd grown tired of saying. I stepped forward. The hall was empty except for a faint humming from the elevator. The brass doors gleamed, newly polished, no scratches, no fingerprints. When they opened, I expected the usual interior. Instead, the walls were lined with dull white panels and a single recessed camera lens above the control board. Basement, the suited man said. I thought about running, but the hallway behind me was already dark. The elevator descended smoothly. My ears popped once, twice, as if we were going deeper than any basement should go. When the doors opened, I saw a corridor unlike anything above. White walls, bright fluorescent lights, no markings except numbered doors, B1, B2, B3, all sealed with magnetic locks. The air smelled sterile. I heard the faint hum of servers, the kind you get in data centers. Right this way, the man said. He led me to a glass, walled room furnished with 2 chairs and a table. A camera blinked in the corner. Please sit. I sat. He placed a small recorder on the table. For the record, he began. State your name. You already know my name. Please confirm it. I hesitated, then said, Caleb Mercer. Thank you. He clicked his pen. Mr. Mercer, you've been part of an environmental stabilization study operated by Mercer Holdings under the Department of Urban Safety. Your compliance rate has been exemplary, though recent behavioral deviations suggest difficulty maintaining isolation tolerance. This isn't a study, I said. It's a prison. He tilted his head slightly, like he'd heard the word 100 times before. You signed a lease. That lease includes observation clauses under section. I didn't sign up to be studied. He smiled faintly. Every tenant says that at first. I clenched my fists under the table. What happens if I refuse? Then we initiate transition. Usually a lateral transfer. Meaning what? A new role. A more structured environment. The other 2 men stood behind him, silent. Their faces didn't look cruel, just detached. He leaned forward. Mr. Mercer, we need continuity. The building requires it. You've proven adaptable. That's why we selected you. Selected me for what? To replace the caretaker. My stomach turned. Mrs. Albright. He nodded. She served well. But order must persist. I'm not doing this. You already are. I stood up, the chair scraping against the floor. The suited man didn't flinch. You can leave, he said. If you can find the door. I looked around. No exits except the elevator, now sealed shut. He pressed a button on his clipboard. The lights dimmed briefly. On the opposite wall, a panel slid open, revealing a narrow hallway leading deeper in. Take a moment, he said. Decide whether you prefer to remain in observation or move into administration. Either way, you'll continue serving. He stood, gathered his papers, and walked out through a door I hadn't seen before. The 2 uniformed men stayed by the wall, watching silently. I turned toward the new hallway. It was unmarked, long, featureless. I could hear faint echoes from somewhere below, machinery maybe, or air vents. When I glanced back, the 2 men were gone. I stepped into the hallway. The lights buzzed faintly overhead, humming like power lines. Doors lined the corridor, each with a frosted glass panel and small brass plaque A4B5A. When I reached the door labeled 5A, my pulse stuttered. That was my apartment number. I opened it. Inside was a perfect replica of my apartment. Same furniture, same folded clothes, same faint scratch on the table. Even the mug on the counter was mine. But the window didn't show the courtyard. It showed a live video feed of it, displayed on a screen built into the wall. I walked closer. The timestamp at the corner read 02:31 a.m. A small figure moved across the courtyard below, heading toward the basement door. It was me. I watched frozen, as the version of me disappeared through the door. Then the screen flickered once and went black. Behind me, a voice spoke softly from the ceiling speaker. Congratulations, Mr. Mercer. Welcome to management. The lights shut off. A single new sound filled the room. The slow, mechanical tick of a clock. I turned. In the corner stood a grandfather clock, brass pendulum swinging steadily, both hands pointing to 2030. When the lights came back on, the clock was still ticking, loud enough to fill the room. The sound didn't echo like a normal clock. It absorbed the air instead, each swing flattening silence into something too steady. I tried the door. Locked. I knocked once. Nothing the second time. A hidden speaker crackled overhead. Remain calm, Mr. Mercer. Acclimation takes time. I shouted, "What is this?" where orientation begins shortly, then static, then quiet again. I sat on the couch, the same couch from my apartment, same worn indentation from where I usually sat. Every item was familiar down to the chipped coffee mug on the table. The illusion was perfect, except for the temperature. The air never changed, cool, unmoving, filtered of any scent. After a while, I heard faint movement beyond the wall. Voices low but rhythmic, like people reciting from a manual. I pressed my ear against the drywall and caught fragments. Reinforce routine, maintain consistency, control variance. A sound followed, a printer spooling paper. Then the door clicked open. A woman stood there. White shirt, gray slacks, clipboard in hand. Her hair was pulled into a bun so tight it seemed painful. "Mr. Mercer," she said as though greeting a colleague. "I'm here to begin your briefing." I didn't agree to this. "You've already demonstrated aptitude. The system has recognized you as a stabilizing participant." "What system?" She ignored the question. "Your duties will be simple. You'll monitor behavior metrics for the residential cohort. When deviations occur, you'll issue guidance notices." I stared at her. "You mean the notes?" "Yes. You'll be provided templates. Typewritten format is still the most effective for compliance." I laughed once, sharp. "You want me to control people? To maintain order?" "No." She smiled faintly, as if I were a child refusing vegetables. "You misunderstand. The alternative is reassignment. Reassignments rarely go well. What happens to them? They lose continuity." The phrase hit me wrong, clinical but final. She placed a folder on the table. Inside were blank forms, exact replicas of the notices I'd received. On the first page, the heading read Caretaker Protocol Manual, 5th Floor Division. She pointed to a line at the bottom. "Caretaker, signature, no. Once you sign, the system will adjust your permissions." I closed the folder. "I want to go home." Her smile didn't change. "You are home, Mercer." She turned to leave, but I grabbed her arm. "At least tell me what this place is." Her eyes flicked to my hand, not with fear but faint irritation. "It's exactly what it appears to be," she said softly. "An apartment building. The rest is just management." She pulled free and walked out. The door sealed behind her. For a long time I sat staring at the folder. I thought about Mrs. Albright, the old woman with the careful smile. About how calm she'd been, how measured every movement was. Maybe she'd sat in this same room once, faced with the same choice. I told myself I wouldn't give in. By the next day, hunger made that harder. There was no food in the kitchen until exactly 700 a.m., when a light above the counter blinked green and the cabinet opened with a quiet click. Inside, a single meal container, labeled prepared meal, administrator 5A, the oatmeal again, bland, textureless. When I ignored it, the cabinet stayed open until nightfall. At midnight, the lights dimmed, and the clock in the corner stopped ticking. Then the cabinet door shut automatically with a faint metallic snap. The next morning, it opened again. Same meal, same label. I gave in. It wasn't long before I lost track of time. Days melted together, identical routines, repeating with mechanical precision. Wake, eat, wait. The same disembodied voice checking in every few hours. Routine is stability. Stability is safety. They wanted to see how long it took before I accepted the role. I tried to resist in small ways. I unplugged the clock. The next day, it was plugged in again, time unchanged. 2:30. I left the meal untouched. The next morning, 2 containers appeared instead. One afternoon, I found the microphone embedded in the baseboard. I leaned close and whispered, "You can't keep doing this to people." Hours later, a new paper slid from under the door. Not IC unauthorized communication with control systems is prohibited. Maintain silence during observation. I tore it up. That night, I dreamed of my apartment upstairs. Sunlight through the blinds, the hum of the city beyond. When I woke, I realized what was missing here. The city. Not faintly, not distant. Gone. No vibrations, no traffic, no subway rattle beneath the building. Just the sterile quiet of machinery humming under earth. On what might have been my 5th day, the woman returned. She didn't knock. "You're adapting well," she said. "Your vitals are stable. Would you like to proceed?" I didn't answer. She placed another folder on the table. thicker than the first. Your next task is simple. Issue 3 reminders. Choose timing, phrasing, and distribution. We'll handle delivery. I flipped through the sheets. They were blank except for letterheads. Unit 5B, Unit 5C, Unit 5D. My neighbors. Why me? Because you follow instructions, even when you think you're resisting. That's leadership. I'm not doing it. She looked at me evenly. Then we'll initiate reassignment. I said nothing. She left the folder behind. I didn't open it for hours. I just sat listening to the hum of the lights, the faint tick of the clock that had started again. At some point, curiosity broke through. I opened to the first sheet. There were faint impressions beneath the paper, as if someone had written over it and erased the text. I rubbed pencil across the page. Letters emerged slowly, grain by grain. Do not fight the routine. It outlasts everyone. The handwriting was small, neat, and familiar. Mrs. Albright. I set the pencil down and stared at the message until my eyes blurred. That night I decided to test something. If they wanted routine, I'd break it entirely. No meal, no sleep, no responses. I'd disrupt the pattern so thoroughly they couldn't ignore it. The lights never dimmed that night. The clock ticked louder instead, as if compensating for my silence. At 20:30 a.m., a tone chimed through the speaker, a single clear note, sustained too long to be comfortable. Then a new voicemail, deliberate. Mr. Mercer, deviation noted. Please resume function. I ignored it. The tone repeated. After the third repetition, the lights cut out. The darkness was total, dense as cloth. I couldn't see my hands. Then I heard footsteps. Bare, slow, approaching the door from the hall. The handle turned once. I held my breath. Mr. Mercer, said the voice now through the door. The building needs consistency. I backed away until my shoulders hit the wall. You've been chosen because you understand order. The voice continued. Chaos exhausts everyone. Be useful. Then silence. The lights returned. The door was still closed, but the folder was gone from the table. In its place, one single slip of paper. Caretaker appointment confirmed. Effective immediately, Unit 5A, status active, management below it, my own signature. Perfectly matched. I sat down hard, staring. I hadn't signed anything. I knew that. A chime sounded overhead. Congratulations, Mr. Mercer, the intercom said warmly. Your cooperation ensures stability for all occupants. Then the screen on the wall flickered on again. This time it showed the real hallway upstairs. I saw the familiar carpet, the faint yellow glow of sconces, and a young man stepping out of the elevator, holding a moving box. Alvin greeted him. The man smiled nervously, looked down at his paperwork, and headed toward my old apartment door. Fefe. I watched him kneel to pick up a key envelope left on the floor. My voice came through the speaker automatically, though I hadn't opened my mouth. Welcome, it said. The young man looked up startled. Then he smiled faintly and stepped inside. The screen went dark. The intercom spoke one last time. Routine restored. Observation cycle reset. I sat in the silence that followed, the hum of the system steady, the clock swinging its pendulum in perfect rhythm. Tick, tock. Each swing locked the pattern deeper. I knew what would happen next. His first footsteps, his first notice, the small rules whispered through the building like prayers. And when he began to question them, he'd find the same name typed at the bottom of every warning slip. Caretaker C. Mercer,